If you've grown a plant, you've most likely had to deal with root rot. Now last month I discovered that my Philodendron Jose Bueno over here had root as well as stem rot. And even though I only discovered it 1 month ago, this plant has already re-established a new root system and grown 2 new leaves. And in today's video I'm going to share with you the trick for a really speedy and safe recovery. Hey everybody and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Root rot is a really common occurrence, and despite the fact that I've been growing plants for 5 years now and I'm using a really nice chunky airwort mix, every now and then it still happens to me and my plants as well. But that's not a concern because I grow most of my plants on moss poles, and moss poles are basically like an insurance policy for your root system. Instead of just relying on roots within the pot, plants grow roots throughout the entire moss pole. So you basically have a vertical spread of the root system, which means that if something happens to the root system down in the pot, that rot would have to spread vertically throughout the entire pole before the plant truly has no roots left. And that is quite unlikely. So basically the moss pole is my insurance policy, and the moss pole being an insurance policy is exactly what helped me give my Philodendron Jose Bueno such a speedy recovery. Now the speed in itself is not actually the important part over here. I'm personally really surprised that within just 1 month it grew so well. But the important part over here is that it's safe. While recovering this plant, the plant is not unrooted. The plant still has a root system within the moss pole. It just now needs to expand this root system from the moss pole back into the pot. That security is much more important than the speed, because at the end of the day, you know, I'm here for the journey. It's not about growing my plants as quickly as possible, but it's more so trying to not kill them. Anyway, before we look at this plant in a little bit more detail, let's take it back to Jan from 1 month ago when I first discovered the issue. We've got a problem. This is my Philodendron Jose Bueno. It is currently pushing out a new leaf via cuttlefill, so it's kind of counterintuitive to think that this plant is currently suffering from root rot and stem rot. I love a moss pole. They are a vertical support, so giving the plant that vertical growth pattern that these love. You know, in nature they would grow up trees, so giving them a vertical support really brings out the best in them. They're also a vertical extension of the pot. As the plant climbs up the moss pole, the plant grows into the moss pole, so it has a bunch of roots within the pole. And that is what is saving this plant for me at the moment. Because every node has its own root system going into the moss pole, I didn't even notice that the entire pot and the stem is actually suffering from rot. If it wasn't for the moss pole and would just be growing up any other support, let's say like a piece of wood for example, wood is not a growing medium, so as soon as the plant would experience some sort of rot in the pot, the whole plant would have suffered. So it took me, I don't know exactly when things went wrong, but I think it took me about 2 to 3 months to even just notice that something is wrong with this plant. Now that's definitely partially on me a little bit as well. I haven't been paying all too much attention to this plant in particular because it hasn't been growing that much, to be honest. Now in hindsight, the fact that it's not growing that fast compared to any other plant might have been a bit of an alarm bell that I ignored, but better late than never. Let me bring you a bit closer. So I've only found out yesterday because I looked at the stem, and the stem down here looked kind of a bit dry, so I started squeezing it, and this whole thing is just completely empty. Like there's nothing here. The whole thing. Looking at the pot as well, I can't really see any roots, so I think they've all rotten. I mean, these nodes don't look all too good either, but you can really see that there's new roots going in here. You can see some healthy roots going in here. And I mean, the plant is growing via cuttlefill and pushing out a new leaf. So it is growing, so there are some roots to support it. Now, something else I've noticed is the plant sending out all of these kind of aerial roots over here. And now in hindsight, I know what they mean. I kind of just thought, oh my god, look, it is so humid, the plant is growing roots like crazy. But now, in hindsight, it makes sense because these are the first nodes that aren't part of the rot. So it makes sense that once the plant lost access to the root system down below due to this rotten part, that it just started growing more roots again. At least, I know, that's how I kind of figured. And it doesn't matter. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to cut off the rotten part. So this node over here still looks healthy, but I'd rather be safe than sorry, and I'm actually going to cut it here instead. Yep, and the stem over here still looks fine, but yeah, can you see this? Look at this. That is just completely gone. That's the stem. Thanks to the moss pole, this plant is overly propagated. I can pot this straight up, but let me also chop the whole moss pole. So I'm just chopping the moss pole at exactly the same area that I chopped the stem. And moss poles are just modular. That's why I like to make my own. That's why I don't like to buy some of these really fancy moss poles, or the ones that are kind of a little bit overcomplicating the thing. I like to make my moss poles just out of a piece of mesh so that I'm in charge of chopping it wherever I want, whenever I want. I can open up the moss pole in the back or completely cut around the wire to remove some roots, because I can just easily make a new one again, right? If you get these purchased poles that are 3D printed or whatever, you don't have all of this flexibility. You can't really easily take the poles apart and so on, because, well, you just spend a whole lot of money on them. You want to reuse them. Same goes for the plastic back ones that I use. I always just remove the plastic backing. I can reuse that, and I can always replace the mesh. If I need to chop up the mesh to make it thicker, smaller, free up some roots, whatever it might be, the mesh is easy to be replaced. So yeah, happy days. What I want to do, I want to give this cut down here just a few minutes to dry out, maybe 30 minutes or something like that. In the meantime, we can look at the pot and see if my suspicion is correct and everything is just rot in there. I would assume so. While we're here, let me also remove a little bit of moss from the bottom part of the pole, because that is going to be filled with air mix instead, because it's going to go into the pot. Now, I have a suspicion that the root rot was caused by it drying out too much and then me re-wetting it, and that all happened in winter as well, which isn't necessarily the best time for anything to go wrong. Okay, I'll just park this on the side over here so that the cut can dry out a little bit. And let me get a different box so we can empty this. So yeah, Jose Bueno is definitely one of these plants that I have noticed doesn't mind drying out a little bit. It actually prefers a little bit of a dry period in between. And that's what I tried, especially over winter. I've been very, very conservative with the watering on this one. Root rod. So being very conservative with the watering then also meant that I think every now and then it dried out a little bit too much. And then when re-watering it, you have very high chances of introducing rot. Okay, I will discard all of this potting medium because it just has way too much root rot in it, and rot can easily spread. So, and I can smell it as well. But look at this stem, look how messed up it is. Yeah. So just looking at the plant in itself, you would have not guessed that this is what the pot and the stem actually looks like. You would have thought it's somewhat healthy, right? Not thriving to its full potential, not living its best life ever, but you would have not expected absolute disaster in the pot by looking at this plant, and you would have not thought that this disaster would have potentially been going on for months. The root rot and the stem rot of course can spread, right? If I would have not noticed that, the rot would have just continued spreading upwards, but well, it would have probably taken another 6 months or so for the whole plant to be eaten up by the rot, I would have thought. Now we have the confirmation. I will give this a little bit more time to dry out. Well, it's been like, a hot minute. So let's, I'll see you back in like 30 minutes maybe. And then we're gonna pot it up. And then we see how long it will take to recover. And of course, I only now realized that I wasn't wearing the microphone. So let me insert the footage of me potting this up in silence. Well, I can narrate it a little bit. Basically, I gave it maybe 30 minutes to dry out, and I filled that bottom part of the pole with aeroid mix, and then I flipped it upside down into a pot, and then I just filled up the rest with aeroid mix again. This aeroid mix is a little bit more tree fern fiber heavy than I recently, or than I usually do. I've been changing to a little bit more of a water retentive mix because we're going into the warmer season, but also because I've actually been really good at just keeping the moss pole moist and not necessarily providing much water to the pot. But as a result of that, I've underwatered a lot of my pots, which caused roots to dry out and then rot once rehydrated. So I'm going with a more water retentive mix on purpose, because that seems to be working best with the way that I water these days. But you can customize it, right? You can make a more chunky mix if you are a little bit more heavy-handed on the water, if you're a little bit more conservative on the water and you're more likely to underwater than overwater, then provide a more water retentive mix, right? There is no right or wrong as long as there's drainage and aeration. And as long as there's water retention, you can kind of mix these components together in the way that suits you, your plants, and your watering frequency. Anyway, technically we haven't induced any shock with this for now, because the shock was already introduced by the rot. We just kind of taken the rot away now so it doesn't spread. So I don't think that this plant should suffer at all as a result of this. If anything, there's a whole lot of little roots that I showed you earlier that are now making contact with substrate rather than with just the air, and they should be able to spread and build a larger root system. But proof is in the pudding, so I'm going to stay patient until I can see some nice signs of growth on this plant. For you, however, that's coming up now. It has only been 2 weeks and things are already improving. Let me show you. Alrighty, first of all, this is the node over here. You can see the node is sending out an aerial root. I want to make sure that that is definitely going into the pole. This is a new leaf. I'm not surprised that the leaf is challenged, but most importantly, I'm seeing fresh root growth over here. Remember, there was no root growth. All of these roots were from the pole that are now expanding. Decent roots over here. Not too much on the other side, but come on, it's only been 2 weeks, so we're definitely on an upwards trajectory. Now let's just stay patient. Thank you, Jan from the past. Now let's have a look at what happened. Alrighty, so we can see there are lots and lots of roots within this pot over here, and these would have all come out of the moss pole and then expanded throughout the pot. Down here, oh, chunky one over here. Very nice. Now we can also see that, I hope you can see this, that this node over here is rooting into the pole, so happy days. That's what I'm referring to when I say insurance policy, right? Even if something would happen down here now, that wouldn't spread to this root anytime soon. It has given me this leaf over here. Now, despite the speedy recovery, it actually also had spider mites. You can see the spider mite damage over here a little bit. So it was actually further challenge, not just root and stem rot, but also pests, but it still managed to recover so quickly. And now the newest leaf is looking really good. Finally, some nice variegation back, even some speckles. I do love the sectoral part. And yeah, it is continuously growing via cutter fill over here. So I think this will become really nice really quickly. Now, of course, we also have to look back at the conditions as well. I always mention that conditions set the potential and then care just realizes the potential. Using the moss pole as an insurance policy, using a chunky aeroid mix, watering, fertilizing and so on, that's just the care aspect. And with the care aspect, I can really only realize the potential I set with the conditions. So the moss pole as an insurance policy is not going to work if you then put your plant in conditions that aren't suited to the plant, right? So we always have got to set the potential with the conditions first. And we are in the middle of summer over here, so great conditions. It's currently about 60% humidity in my office. It's about 25 degrees because I can't air condition my office. There's no air conditioning in there. And it is located right in a west-south facing window. Keep in mind I'm in the southern hemisphere, so south is technically the worst exposure. Given that we're in the middle of summer, it's not that bad. It still gets a lot of bright indirect light, and it gets a little bit of afternoon sun from the west facing window. So I think overall, I'm also really lucky that the conditions suit this plant in the first place. But we still need to realize the potential that these conditions have set, and I think using a moss pole is such a great way of realizing that potential, while also giving you the insurance that in case something ever happens, you're gonna have a pretty safe and speedy recovery. So I have a full moss pole playlist where I talk about how I make my moss poles, how I water my moss poles, how I extend my moss poles, how I pot up my moss poles, where I talk about moss alternatives and so on. So if you want to learn more about moss poles, please check out the moss pole playlist that I'll link at the end screen, but today's video was really just more focused on moss poles being an insurance policy. I hope you enjoyed this video. Give it a thumbs up, leave a nice comment down below, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and hopefully I'll see you in my next video. Bye!